It's that time again. Hello my friends, it's me, Ian, here with another video, the most exciting video one could argue that I will ever make, at least this year. Yes, it is time for my top books of 2022. I say top books because normally in years past, not only here on BookTube, but in general in my life, I have done a top 10 of the year, but I don't think that I'm exaggerating when I say that making a top 10 list of the books I read in 2022 is the hardest thing that anyone has ever done, ever. Not an exaggeration at all. So yeah, I was trying my darndest to narrow down of the 133 books that I have completed in 2022, my top 10, and it was miserable. It was terrible. It was no good. It was very bad. Not because the books were bad, because they were wonderful, but because my original first draft of just like going through my 133 books read and saying like, yeah, that one could be top 10, that one could be top 10, was 30 books long. And I had the hardest time narrowing it down. I did manage to split up the list pretty early on into a top 15 and a 15 honorable mentions, but then I was trying so hard to just cut off 5 more from my top 10, and it was impossible. It was impossible. And on top of that, I was trying to do like a numerical ranking of like my least favorite to my absolute favorite book of the year, and that was impossible too. And I was struggling, and I was struggling, and I was struggling, and then I remembered I can do what I want. This is my channel. No one's making me do a top 10. And so, voila, there you have it. This year you are getting a top 15 books that I read in 2022. And then in addition to that, sometime next week, I will post an honorable mentions video because those other 15 deserve some love too. They're amazing. They may not have been in my top 15 of the year, but they could be in yours for 2023. So yes, expect that video at some point too. And like I said, this is not gonna be in any particular order overall. That being said, there are 2 books that I read in 2022 that I would consider to be like in my top 10 books of all time, which is a list I'm actually working on narrowing down, and I will make a video for that at some point in 2023. But yes, there are 2 books that I read this year in 2022 that are some of my favorites ever, amazing, haven't stopped thinking about them since I read them, and I do want to give those a very special shout out at the end of the video. So stick around to see what my top 2 books of the year are, and read them after, please. Before we jump in though, you watching this video, please pause right now and comment down below what was your favorite book of 2023, because I love amazing books. I love reading books that are gonna blow my mind, and I know that you read some this year, so please go down there and tell me what your favorite book was so I can read it. So this is not gonna be in any particular order because that would just be madness. What I am gonna do is I'm gonna first talk about the books that I don't have physical copies of, which there are a few. I have a lot of audiobooks that I listen to, but then I will jump into this random stack of books over here. Like I said, no order to the madness. I'm just gonna grab them and talk about them. So there you have it. Side note, before we jump into my top 15, I will be making more videos going forward into the new year. I'm aiming for 2 videos a week, especially because I just finished yesterday my first draft of my ever finished novel. It was a lot of work. My hand is like still hurting because I wrote 27,000 words in the last like 3 or 4 days. But I did it, you guys. I did it. I don't know if anyone will ever read it other than like my family. But people could, especially because there's so many amazing self-published authors that I've discovered this year that publish the book themselves, and the books are amazing. So I don't have to dream of being published anymore. I could just self-publish it if I want to, but I probably won't because it's probably terrible, but I did it. So I'm really proud of myself. Anyway, side note aside, let's go ahead and jump into my top 15 of 2022. So like I said, we're not gonna be going in any particular order. That being said, I did want to go ahead and start off with one that I really want to get your attention with, because you can get all 3 of the books in this trilogy I'm about to talk about on Audible for 1 credit. That's right, a whole trilogy for 1 credit. And the series is amazing. The book series that I'm talking about, the first book that I'm talking about in my top 15 of 2022 is the Threadlight series by Zach Argyle. This is a self-published, completed trilogy that I've had my eye on for some time. The first book is called Voice of War, the second book is called Stones of Light, and the third book is called Bonds of Chaos. And you guys, this trilogy is amazing. If you are a fantasy reader, you are going to want to pick these up. There are amazing characters, a wonderful and exciting magic system, huge stakes, world building that is very well crafted, because one of the things that I love about this series so much is the books are not long. Like, I love a huge epic fantasy series that is like gigantic and will ruin your life because it consumes it. But every once in a while, it is nice to read a fantasy trilogy or book that is not a billion pages long. Am I right? And so with the Threadlight trilogy, each of the books are like 300 pages long. I think that the longest audiobook is like 12 and a half hours maybe. And so collectively, you can listen to the entire trilogy in the time it takes you to listen to one book by Mr. Brandon Sanderson. Like, what are you doing? And like I said, you can get it for 1 credit. But moving on from the 1 credit thing, but seriously jump on that, this trilogy is fantastic. It is so consistent. The first book was excellent, and they just got better and better from there. And I was a little nervous about how Zach Argyle was going to wrap up the trilogy, just because I feel like the ending of a series can really make or break it in your mind, if nothing else. Like, I knew book 1 and 2 were amazing, but I didn't know if I was going to be confident in putting it on my year-end list if the trilogy ended on a bad note, like it left a bad taste in my mouth. But I can honestly say book 3, Bonds of Chaos, was the best of the bunch. It was moving, it was powerful, there were some great twists and surprises. There's a lot of great themes. It's amazing. It's a fantastic fantasy trilogy, and I highly recommend it. Please pick this book up. On top of that, if you are not ready to commit to giving one whole credit to a whole trilogy for some reason, you can go to Zach Argyle's website, sign up for his email list, and get the first audiobook for free, my guy. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot to say, the narrator for this series is Adam Gold, and he is literally one of the best audiobook narrators I have ever heard in my life. And I listen to like over 100 audiobooks a year. He was amazing. Please check the series out. There's a dog barking outside. Come on, dog. I'm working here. So the next books that I wanted to talk to you guys about on my top 15 of 2022, we're just gonna go ahead and get these out of the way because we all knew Stephen King was gonna be on this list. He's practically my favorite author, one of my most read authors, if not my most read author for sure. I read, I think, maybe 8 Stephen King books this year. I didn't count. I'm just throwing a random estimation out there, but these are the 2 best ones that I read and are in my top 15 of the year. The first one is Carrie by Stephen King, and this is his debut published novel. It's not the first book he ever wrote, but it is the first book that he ever published. And you guys, when I tell you that I was surprised at how much I loved this book, that's like a huge, massive understatement, because Carrie is a cultural phenomenon. I feel like everybody knows what happens in Carrie to a certain extent. Like, you don't know the intricate details of it necessarily, unless you've maybe seen the films, which I haven't, so I don't know how accurate they are. But you know, like, the big thing that happens in Carrie. Most people do. And I did. I knew what was going to happen, and yet this book blew me away. Like, I thought it was so well crafted. In my opinion, it is one of the best debut novels I've ever read. And in addition to that, it's so concise and so perfect in my head. Like, it is a near perfect book to me, and I don't say that often. I love Carrie so much because it is short, and Stephen King doesn't have a ton of short books. And I feel like he really trimmed all the fat off of it, just got it down to the bare bones, and it worked so well. There's also this like epistolary kind of thing that he does in the book. It's not like the whole story, but every once in a while you'll get these little flashes of like the citizens of the town that go through this thing that happens, kind of giving their account of like what they saw and how they perceived what happened and their thoughts on the people that were involved in it and all that jazz. And that happens throughout the story. And so Stephen King kind of spoils himself. I'm sure when he wrote the book, he didn't know it was going to be the cultural phenomenon that it is, but he spoils what happens in the book throughout the book. Like, you kind of know something bad's going to happen near the very beginning. And that's the beauty of it. Like, for some people, I think it would take kind of the punch out of what happens. But for me, instead, it had this effect of giving me this immense feeling of dread that just continued to grow and grow as we got closer to the event. And then when it happened, it was just like all hell broke loose. It was amazing. I loved it so much. If you haven't read Stephen King, this is a great place to start. There are horror aspects, but not by any means his scariest novel, and I think he has some great character work here as well. Yes, Carrie is amazing. I loved it so much. On the other side of Stephen King's bibliography, we have Insomnia, which, while Carrie is known for being very small and shorter than some people would like, Insomnia is massive. This book is like at least 700 pages, I think. And some people complain that it's too long. I am not in that camp. I love this book so much. Insomnia is definitely one of his later books. I think it came out in the 90s. I believe it came out in the 90s. And Insomnia follows a man named Ralph who is older. He's like in his 50s or 60s, I think. No, wait. Maybe he's in his 70s. I don't remember. He's older. And Ralph has lost his wife at the very beginning of the book, and he's now suffering from insomnia. And that is kind of the setup. But he also starts seeing weird things in the town, and people in the town start acting really weird too. And things definitely go from there. This book blew me away because of the character work, first of all. I loved Ralph. He was a really engaging protagonist, and I liked having a protagonist that was like near the end of his life and was really reflecting back on a lot of things. He was wiser than a lot of protagonists in Stephen King novels, and I appreciated that. But at the same time, he also had kind of like this flair of youthfulness that persisted despite his age and his experience and things like that. It was just really cool to read. I loved him as a character, and I honestly do think that that is critical for you to love this novel as much as I do, because some people absolutely adore this book and some people really, really don't. And I think the key is loving Ralph as a character because he makes this novel as good as it is. Some parts of the book are slower and are just kind of him like dwelling in this state of not being sure what's going on and kind of trying to find out what's happening to him and all of that. And I think you have to really enjoy Ralph as a character for that to work for you. So I'll say that, give it a try. If you get to like 20% and you don't necessarily love it, you can consider DNFing it, I guess, but please don't because it's amazing. I will also say, this is very critical to your experience of the Dark Tower series. It is not a Dark Tower novel, but some people say it's a Dark Tower novel in everything but name. There are some huge implications for the Dark Tower series in here. Stephen King loves to throw in little Easter eggs for the Dark Tower in his other works, but there are big things that happen in this. I haven't even gotten to the end of the Dark Tower series where those things kind of come to fruition, but I can see that the dominoes are like beginning to fall. So if you've read The Dark Tower, this is a great book to read because it kind of fills in some blanks for you. And there are also a few other Easter eggs from other King novels, so that's really cool. I love this book. 5 out of 5. Okay, so I believe that concludes the portion of the video of the books that I do not currently have physical copies of. I want to get physical copies of all of them at some point. I'm just waiting for the right edition for the Stephen King books, and I just haven't gotten around to ordering Threadlight because the audiobooks are so amazing. But moving on from that, we're gonna go ahead and jump into this random stack of books. Like I said, they're not in any order, except the last 2 books I will talk about for a long time because they are my favorites of the year. But we're just gonna go ahead and jump into this other stack of books now. First up, we have Boy's Life by Robert R. McCammon. So this was the first book that I read in 2022, and it was amazing. It was beautiful. This book is magic, you guys. It is a coming-of-age story set, in the 60s. And it follows a young protagonist named Corey McKenson, and it's just about his coming of age in this town where some weird things are happening, some very suspicious things. People have been murdered, and like the town's kind of like overlooking it, and he just wants to know what the heck is going on. And his little 11-year-old self and his friends get too involved in it, and things go from there. I love this book dearly. The only reason it is not in my like top of the year, because again, this is not in any order. This is not saying this is like number 12 or whatever. But I was going through a lot when I was reading this book, and it was a comfort at times, but I was also really distracted. It was the very beginning of the year. We had just gotten out of the holiday season, and I was in the midst of changing jobs and starting grad school. And so I don't think it was the best time for me to read it. And this book, above all the rest, I think upon reread will be solidified as one of my favorite books of all time. So I do actually plan on rereading this book in the summer of this year, because this is also like a really great book for summer, I think. And I read it in winter, which is kind of strange, but I think upon a reread, I'm going to love this book even more. So I'm very, very excited to reread Boy's Life at some point this summer. And I think it'll be even better then. But this book is on a ton of people's top 10 list of the year, and for good reason. I love that this book has had a resurgence. As soon as I read it at the very beginning of the year, I was like, oh my gosh, more people need to read this. And then, like magic, it happened. And it wasn't even me. Like, I think some person who's a much bigger booktuber than me, maybe it was Mike's Book Reviews, I don't remember, somebody picked it up and loved it. And so a bunch of other people read it, and now everybody loves it. And I think that is the best thing in the world, especially since this book has been out for a long time. So it's getting all the love and attention here on our little corner of BookTube that it deserves. If you have not read this book yet, please, for the love of God, pick it up It's incredible. Next up, we have Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. So I had been wanting to read Dennis Lehane's books for a long time. I had a handful of them sitting on my shelf. And then this month in December, I decided to go ahead and pick Mystic River up. And then I had to pick up 2 more books by him this month because it was just that good. And it was a real struggle between this book and one other that will be on my honorable mentions list. It was actually number 16, and I cut it at the last second because I read one book that shot to the top of my favorites list, but it was supposed to be on this list until now. I had to pick one Dennis Lehane book to be on this list, and it had to be Mystic River. This book is incredible, you guys. It is so good. It's so good and so heartbreaking. There's a award-winning movie that has been made out of this. It won a lot of Oscars, I think, for like Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. I have not seen the movie, and if you haven't seen the movie, please just read the book first. Not because the movie's not going to be amazing, because I'm sure it is, but because the experience of reading this book and finding out everything that happens is just so dramatic on the page, and I loved it so much. So this story follows 3 boys who as children were friends, but something really bad happens to one of them as children, and the other 2 kind of feel a lot of guilt as a result of that. And then it skips like 20 years, and the 3 boys are now adults, and one of their children is murdered violently and terribly, and the other 2 men get kind of drawn into this situation. One of them, it's the father of the person who was murdered. One of them is the detective who is investigating the case, and another one showed up at home on the night of the murder covered in somebody else's blood. That's the setup, and it's amazing. Not only is the character work in this story absolutely incredible, the mystery is so riveting, and there's some huge twists in this book. There were some moments I had to pause listening to it because I listened to the audiobook and I just absorbed what I had listened to, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. And on top of that, the emotional resonance of this book is fantastic. Like, I've hardly read mystery books that have so much weight in them. A lot of bad things happen in mystery books. I mean, typically they revolve around some crime or some murder or some death, but this book so well captured grief and trauma and the fear of like what happened to my loved one, what is happening to my loved one, and just like that view from a parent's perspective, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder and suppressing pain from the past. There's just so many heavy items of discussion in this book, and they're handled so well, and it's so moving. I teared up a couple times in this book. I don't know if it's because I'm a parent or just because I'm a human being, but this book is absolutely amazing. Please read Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. It is fantastic. So good. Next is another, I guess technically mystery thriller book. It feels like a thriller, I guess, because it's super action-packed, but I wouldn't necessarily call it like a traditional thriller. And that book is Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. S.A. Cosby made my top 10 list last year with his book Razorblade Tears, and he has another book coming out in 2023 that I'm so excited about. And I also read another book by him this year called My Darkest Prayer. It was his first published book that is now being rebranded with a different publisher. That was really good too, but Blacktop Wasteland was amazing. I read this book, I think, in February, and it has stuck with me a lot because of the themes and because of the character choices that S.A. Cosby made in this book. So we follow Bug. I can't think his actual name is Beauregard, but he goes by Bug, and he has a shady past that he's trying to shake off. He was like a getaway driver, an amazing getaway driver for some criminal activity, and he just wants to be a normal guy. He wants to be a good father, a good family man, but because of some money that he needs desperately, I believe, he gets pulled back into the life of crime for one last thing. And things go from there. And what I really loved about this book is the way that S.A. Cosby does some unexpected things with the main character, and we really see his struggle between the two people that he feels like he is, because on one side he feels like that family man and that's who he wants to be, but on the other side there's this person who is not necessarily good that he also feels like he is, and it really deals with the duality of man in a way that I don't see a lot of times in thrillers. I feel like a lot of times in thrillers there's a lot of like good people and bad people, but with this, our main character is really struggling with who he is and who he wants to be, and that is so well done. And that is the thing, aside from like the blood-pounding action of this book, that really stuck with me. It is an amazing book. If you read Razorblade Tears, which has gotten super massively popular since its release, please go back and read Blacktop Wasteland, because it is just as good as Razorblade Tears. I will read anything that S.A. Cosby writes at this point. I have read all of his published novels, and I plan on reading them all as soon as they come out. So good. Next, we have another self-published book that I got to read this year and I love so much. This is probably some of the most fun that I had in 2022 while reading. And the book I'm talking about is Wistful Ascending by JCM Byrne. So this is the first book in the Hybrid Helix series. I talk about this book a lot on my channel. I have a dedicated review that I will link down below. But just to kind of briefly tell you what this book is about, we follow Rohan here, who is a retired superhero slash intergalactic veteran guy, and he is a beast. He has incredible abilities, he's super strong, and he's done a lot of terrible things, but he wants to just retire. He wants to be left alone. He has now moved to this space station that you can see a little bit back here that is called Wistful. It's a sentient space station, which is super cool. And there are also sentient ships in this book, which are so fun. But he just wants to be left alone. He's a tow chief, which means he just brings ships that are coming out from space and he helps them dock at the space station. And that's his life. But unfortunately, Wistful, the sentient spaceship, knows about his abilities and about his past. And so often she calls on him to assist with the goings-ons on the space station, which there are a lot of goings-ons. A lot of things happen in this book, and it is so much fun. I had a blast with this. It really does feel like kind of episodic in that you follow him kind of in like the day-to-day just life of being a tow chief, but then like all these different conflicts arise, and every time he's just like kind of incredulous to the fact that he's being dragged back into it, but he's also a good-hearted person, so he wants to help. But kind of similar to Blacktop Wasteland, we have this person who's struggling a lot with the things that they have done, and he really struggles with like who he is and who he wants to be and whether or not he can be a good person after everything that he's done. And so there are some heavy themes in this, but they're handled so well, and the moments of light and dark really contrast each other in a really nice way. I love this book so much. I have book 2 and 3. Thank you so much to the author for sending me all of these, and I'm saving them for a rainy day. I had started reading book 2. I was really enjoying it, but there were a lot of other things pulling me away at the time, and I was like, you know what? I want to save these for when I need a book to drag me out of my reading slump, because I get reading slumps like a few times a year, and this is the perfect antidote. So I will definitely be finishing the 3 books that are out so far in this series ASAP, or whenever I need to, and I look forward to all that JCM Byrne does in the future. I love this book. Continuing with the self-published love, we have Never Die by Rob J. Hayes. This is another book that you can get for super good deals. I don't know what I'm saying. You can get for 1 credit on Audible this book and the 2 companion novels in the Mortal Techniques series. This book is Never Die. It's the first one. You don't have to read them in order necessarily, but I do recommend starting with Never Die and going to the other 2 after that, because while it's not like a continuation of a series, there are some characters that overlap that you will meet in the series. And I actually haven't finished either of the other 2 books, but I love Never Die so much. This is a really short fantasy book that is action-packed, you guys. It's so edge of your seat good. I could not stop reading it. As soon as I started, I think I finished within like 12 hours because this book is so good. And it's awesome and incredible. And let me tell you what it's about. So at the start of the book, we have this young boy who has been tasked by the god of death, I believe, to stop this huge warrior guy that is just not good. He's no good. He needs to be stopped. And so the god of death has given this child the ability to recruit these legendary warriors that you see here, all of which have really cool names like Whispering Blade and things like that. It feels like a cool movie where all these warriors have like legend names and stuff like that, like the Dragon Warrior. But moving on from that, the boy can recruit them, but for him to be able to recruit them and get him to do his bidding, they first have to die. And so he goes about trying to kill these massive heroes so that he can resurrect them and basically chain them to his will and get them to do his bidding. And so we start off with this main character right here who dies at the very beginning, and then she goes around with the boy trying to kill all of these heroes so that they can stop the big baddie. And my gosh, it is so fun. I had a blast with this book. It's probably like the most action-packed, edge-of-your-seat good time that I had this year. There are a lot of other great books that did that as well, but Never Die was just non-stop. Like, it never stopped. And I loved it so much. Please check out Rob J. Hayes. Please check out this book. Like I said, you can get 3 books for 1 on Audible with the Mortal Techniques box set Audible thingy-mabobber. Do it. This book is amazing. Check it out. And then we have the final self-published book on my top 15 of 2022. It was great to read a lot of really good self-pub this year, and I'm so glad I found so many books that I loved from that exploration. But the book that I'm talking about now is The Legend of Blackjack by A.R. Witham. This book is like a booktube darling, especially in this little community that we have here in the sci-fi fantasy lovers. area, and it's so well deserved. The Legend of Blackjack is incredible. I have been meaning to film a review for this for a very long time because I think I finished it in August. But to be honest, I have been so busy and I want to give this the review that it deserves. I want to really sit down and talk to you guys about the things that I loved about this book, and there are so many things, but just to kind of sell you on it, this is the thought that occurred to me as I finished this book. And I think it really well encapsulates my thoughts. And that is that, it's kind of a weird thought, but if an alien was to come down from the stars and have no idea what a book was or what a story was, I would give them The Legend of Blackjack by A.R. Witham. And the reason for that is, this book is everything that I feel like a book can be. And that's high praise. I don't say that about a lot of books. I think a lot of books do certain things well, and that's kind of the point. This does everything well, to be honest, in that it has beautifully crafted characters with some amazing highs and super low lows. It is just kind of traditional in its story arc, in that you kind of have the traditional plot pyramid thingy-mabobber. You can definitely see that in this book, and so I think it very well displays the typical story arc in that way. But on top of that, you experience so many different emotions in this book. I experienced joy, I experienced heartbreak, I felt like crying on multiple occasions in this book, but it was not always because I was sad. I had happy moments of teary eyes and sad moments of teary eyes. There is magic, there is wonder, there is... Oh, it's so good. So let me actually tell you what it's about. So we follow Jack, who is a young boy who at the very beginning of the story is just having a really hard time. He has lost family members that he loves, and he feels just completely alone. And one day, he wakes up in the middle of the night on his birthday, I think it's his 14th birthday, and there is a rhinoceros at the end of his bed, and it starts talking to him, and it whisks him away to this magical land. And Jack is a really special boy in that he is incredibly intelligent, and he wants to be a doctor, and so he's read all of these like doctoral books about medicine and things like that, and he knows a lot. And so he basically says, hey, you need to come here because I need you to help me save this person. And so he takes him to this other world, and the story goes from there, and Jack kind of gets swept into this web of lies, and that they think he's this legendary person named Blackjack, and it goes from there, and it's incredible. And please just read this book because it is so good. It's so good. Like I said, it's everything that a book should be. And I loved it so much. Yes, read this book now. Next, we have Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is a book that I've been wanting to read for a few years, really since it came out. I've had my eye on it, and I finally read it this year, and it was really beautiful. So this book follows the family of William Shakespeare. Although Shakespeare is in it, sort of, he's never referred to by name. But we follow his family, primarily his wife named Agatha, and his children, one of which is Hamnet. And it revolves around the death of Hamnet. And so you already kind of know at the very beginning that Hamnet's going to die, but it's about before that happens and after that happens, and kind of the family's history and their backstory around that. And I think that this book is really well done, not only because it's just beautifully written, but because the atmosphere and the character work here make this feel almost like a fable. And that's, fitting considering the person it's about, that it's about this person who gave us so many classic stories. But the way that it's told, there's like this element of magical realism that persists throughout the book. And you never really know if there is something actually strange going on, or if it's just the whimsy of the world that is built within this historical fiction novel. And I adored it. I don't think it will be for everybody, although a lot of people love this book, but I will say the ending is a little bit more ambiguous than some people might like. For me, it worked 100%. This is a very emotional novel because it does revolve around the death of a child. But it is just beautifully told, beautifully written. I loved it dearly, and it definitely impacted me so much when I read it. I highly recommend Hamnet if you're looking for an emotional historical fiction. Speaking of historical fiction that'll get the tears flowing, we have This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger. This book blew me away, and in the first half of the year, it was my favorite book, and it is still probably in my top 5 of the year. But I just want to talk about it right now. Miss Tenderland is an incredibly powerful and moving historical fiction book set in the 1930s in America. We follow 4 young orphans who have been attending this boarding school, which is a terrible place. Awful. The kids are treated horribly. There's a lot of terrible stuff going on. And so the 4 children accidentally do something at the school that causes them to decide, oh my gosh, we have to run away or we're going to die here in this place. And so the 4 of them set out across America to try to find family. Some of the boys believe they have family in California, so the 4 of them head out together to find that family. But what they don't know is that they already found family together. I'm being dramatic, but this book is so beautiful, you guys. It is a coming-of-age story with so much heart, so much drama, so much emotion, so much adventure too. Just these 4 boys setting out across America. It's great. I loved it so much. This is another book that had moments of highs and lows that made me emotional. I don't cry often, but I feel like there were a lot of books that made me tear up a bit. I didn't like weep or anything. I'm not a weeper, but I teared up. This book is beautiful. I loved it so much. It filled my heart as I read it. And so I'm really grateful for that. I will definitely reread this at some point, and I need to pick up more William Kent Krueger. I've had some great recommendations from people, and I hope it happens in 2023 because this book was stunning. We are getting down to the wire. We only have 4 books left to talk about. And so next we have We Are the Light by Matthew Quick. This was a much anticipated book for me. As soon as I found out it was coming out, I desperately started trying to get an ARC. And luckily I did get an e-ARC of it, and I read it, and I loved it so much. Matthew Quick is one of my favorite authors of all time. I've read all of his books, and I think he has 9 or 10. And We Are the Light is probably my favorite of all of them. So I want to tell you what this book is about, but I don't want to spoil any of the things that happen because I feel like the reveals and the slow understanding that you acquire as you read it of what has happened is critical to your full enjoyment of it. But I will say we are in a small town called Majestic, and our main character is in the aftermath, and the city is in the aftermath of this huge thing that has happened, a huge tragedy that impacted a lot of people. And our main character was pivotally involved in that in a good way, but he now has to grapple with like this kind of perspective that people have on him that he's not sure that he deserves. And in addition to that, his wife has supposedly died, but he is seeing her as an angel, and she's talking to him even though nobody else can see him or see her. And things go from there, and my gosh, this book broke my heart. I did cry in We Are the Light. Actually cry. I guess I learned that I have a heart this year because I cried a lot more than I thought that I did. But We Are the Light is absolutely moving. It broke my heart. It filled my heart with joy. It's a story about healing. It's a story about grief and loss and about how a community heals. And it's also about mental health. There's a lot of mental health here that is talked about, and there's a lot that is suppressed, and bad things happen as a result. And it's amazing. We Are the Light by Matthew Quick. Please read it. Alrighty guys, we are at the last book before we get to my top 2, and this book that I'm holding up is actually not really the book that I want to talk about, but it represents the series as a whole, and that series is The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. So this is a 4-book series that I did a read-along for on my channel, and I really enjoyed each book, but to varying extents. Book 1 was really good. Book 2 was a masterpiece. That is The Wall of Storms, and that's really the one that I would put on my top 10. The other, or like not top 10, top 15. The others are really good, but I don't necessarily know that any of them on their own would be in this list. Because then we have book 3 and 4, which are The Veiled Throne and Speaking Bones, which originally were one novel that Ken Liu wrote and then had to split up because it would have been over 2,000 pages if he published it as one book. And that's partially why my enjoyment kind of was lowered, because those books were split up, but also because it was just massively long, like too long. But we're not going to talk about negatives. This is a positive video. So let's talk about The Wall of Storms and why I love the Dandelion Dynasty. So this is an epic tapestry of a series that follows this nation, or really this world, because there are multiple nations and cultures that are dealt with. And this is heavily inspired by Asian history. Ken Liu takes a lot of historical events and historical figures and kind of translates them and does his own take on them in this series. And that is really cool to know that like there's such a heavy inspiration from actual people and events in these novels. And I honestly wish that I knew more about that history going in so that I could really just kind of be in on the secrets that Ken Liu was sharing with us. But that aside, this book is, I think somebody said, I think Kyle, read by Kyle, said that in an interview with Ken Ken said that this is like a fantasy series, but rather than like warriors or magicians being at the center, it's engineers. And that is really what it is. This book is about a bunch of brilliant minds and the ways that they advance technology, the ways that they advance their culture, and just the wealth of supplies and knowledge that their people have so that they can gain victory in battle. It is epic. It follows multiple generations of a family as they kind of grapple with power. And in addition to that, there are just so many cultures that are balanced in this book, and you find out so much. Like, Ken Liu had a blast writing this. I'm sure he did. Like, having finished now my measly little mystery thriller, I'm in awe even more of what Ken Liu has done, because this is insane. Like, the scope of the Dandelion Dynasty is ridiculous. So the Dandelion Dynasty absolutely deserves to be on my list, even if the individual parts don't necessarily amaze me or I didn't enjoy them as much on their own. The series itself is a masterpiece. It is incredible. It is stunning what Ken Liu did. If you've tried this series, please at least read book 2, because The Wall of Storms is wow, amazing. One of the best fantasy books I've ever read. And the series as a whole is absolutely worth the thousands of pages you will read. It is epic, it is daunting, it is sometimes slow, and the scope that he does is kind of like, at some points it feels like you're like at a bird's eye view, because a lot of years will pass and you'll get kind of these flashes of these moments as like this war is going on, but it is stunning. I mean, this is one of the best fantasy series you can read. Please give it a try. I love it so much. It's great. So here we are, the top of the top, the 2 books that are my favorite books of the year and have made my favorite books of all time list. These 2 books I read at opposite ends of the year. One of them I read at the very beginning, and one of them I just finished in December. And so there may be a little bit of recency bias involved with the December one, but I really don't think so, because this was a book that, and we'll talk about the December one first. This book was one that when I had read literally just the first like 15, 20 pages, I stopped. And I read this as part of my book club, my family book club's quarterly book pick. And I stopped and I texted all of them and I said, I've only read 20 pages of this book, but I know that it's going to be a favorite. And I was right. I was right. I know my own tastes. I knew. And so the book that I'm talking about is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I don't think I said his name right, but I'm sorry. This book is so good. I don't think it's for everybody because it is kind of slow. And it is long, not super long, but it's like 470 pages. But for some people, I think you have to just really care about what's going on and about the characters, because it's kind of like this layered story. And I'll get into that. But I know this won't be for everybody, but I loved it so much. The Shadow of the Wind follows a young boy named Daniel Sempere, who at the very beginning of the book, when he's, I think, 10 years old, maybe 11, his father takes him to this place called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is this very secretive bookstore that he can't tell anybody about. And what he says is, go pick a book. And there's supposed to be like this tie between Daniel and whatever book he picks. And he picks a novel called The Shadow of the Wind, which is by a man named Julian Carax. And he reads the book, he loves it, he's obsessed with it, and so he goes back to this bookseller and he says, tell me anything you can about this man and his other books. And he knows very little, and he basically says the only thing he knows is that there are none of his works available because somebody has been going around the world burning every copy of this man's books that he can find. And there's this great mystery involved in this book. And when I say I think you have to care about it, is because a lot of the mystery itself involves characters that you don't really meet. Or it does involve characters you meet, but it's kind of Daniel going from person to person, getting their version of the events that happened and their perspective on the people that were involved in the things that happened. And so in that way, it's layered because there's Daniel and his life going on, and then there's this other person and their lives that you kind of find out about. And there are a lot of comparisons and parallels between the two in an odd way. They kind of mirror each other at moments. But yeah, it's slow, but it's wonderful, and the writing is absolutely stunning. This is translated from Spanish, and holy crap, the translator did an amazing job, because this was some of the most beautiful writing that I've ever read, and I loved the characters. There's one character in particular, his name is Fermin, and oh man, I love him dearly. He's probably my favorite character of the year. But on top of that, on top of the beautiful writing, the incredible atmosphere, the love of books and literature that just oozes from this novel, on top of all of that, you have an amazing mystery. Not only were there just so many moments that like had me guessing, there were 2 moments in particular that literally made me gasp out loud. Like when there was the reveal, I had to stop. My dad had already finished it, and so I called him both times. I was like, what just happened? And man, this book, it's incredible. I love it so much. It's technically part of a series. I think it probably just revolves, because it's called like the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series. I think it just revolves around like that location and different people interacting with it. I could be wrong. But this definitely works as a standalone, and you guys, it's incredible. I love The Shadow of the Wind so much. It's incredible. Yes. And now the last book on my top 15 of the year is one that is definitely in my top 5 books of all time. And yeah, I've talked about this book a lot on my channel, and it's so funny because this really speaks to the way that books sit with you after you've read them and how your ideas and thoughts about them can change. Because when I read this book, I think I was even torn on whether or not I wanted to give it 5 stars. There are a few things about this book that bothered me, I won't lie to you, but the more that I sat with this book, the more that I pondered on it and I remembered the characters and the moments and just the vast scope of it, the more that I loved it. And the book that I'm talking about is The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. So this is the first book, and I think it's called the Kingsbridge series. I don't know, but it works as a standalone as well. That's one thing I love about both of these books, is that they're part of series, but they work as standalones. And The Pillars of the Earth is about the building of a cathedral. It's historical fiction. It takes place over a lot of decades, and you follow just so many characters, so many. It is epic. It is massive. I don't think it's 1,000 pages, but it's pretty darn close. Yeah, it's 975 pages, pretty much. So this is a huge undertaking, but one of the things that I love about this book so much is that the author, Ken Follett, before writing The Pillars of the Earth, was a mystery thriller author. That is what he was known for. That is what all of his published books were, I think, at least for the most part. And he writes this massive historical fiction book like a mystery thriller author, in that there were so many, like from the get-go, I was hooked. There were so many moments that I was on the edge of my seat, like time after time. Like you take a historical fiction book about the building of a cathedral that is almost 1,000 pages long, but you have a mystery thriller author write it. Like it's the perfect recipe for a book that I would love. And it was incredible. The characters, the character arcs were massive. The beauty of life and the beauty of love and of destiny and a person's legacy. There were just so many things in this book that I adored. It is epic, beyond epic, and I will reread it at some point, and I will love every minute of it, because like I said, it just reads so easy. Like, it's long, but it doesn't feel long, in my opinion, because there's so many characters, and you love a lot of them desperately, and you hate a lot of them with a fiery, burning passion, but their stories are just so engaging, and the action, and not even action, because like literally it's about the building of a cathedral, but the things that happen are just so riveting. Like, this is one of the most riveting books I've ever read, and it's 1,000 pages long, and it's about the building of a cathedral. Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense how engaging and fun this book was, but it was. And it was also just beautiful. And so, yeah, The Pillars of the Earth and The Shadow of the Wind, these are my 2 favorite books of the year. Both of them are historical fiction to an extent. This is historical fiction. It's set in Barcelona, by the way. I'm all over the place, but it's set in Barcelona in the 1940s and 50s. So this is historical fiction with magical realism, and this is historical fiction set, God, I don't know, the 1600s, maybe? I have literally no idea. I love historical fiction, apparently, but these are beautiful, and everyone should read them, even if you don't love historical fiction, because they're masterpieces. That's it. This was a little bit chaotic. It was definitely all over the place, but it's my list. So there you go. But thank you so much for watching, you guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please let me know down below if you've read any of these books, if you want to read any of these books, what your favorite book was of 2022, and what you're looking forward to reading in 2023. Just leave me all the comments, you guys. I want to talk to you. I want to hear from you. I love you guys. Happy New Year, happy holidays, and let 2023 be the best year yet. Bye.